The Shilla Ballroom was a sea of crystal chandeliers and high-carat diamonds, a place where status was the only currency and outsiders were invisible. Until Talia Vaughn walked in. Draped in emerald silk that caught every eye in the room, she looked like a queen, but to Seo Yun, she was nothing more than a target for her desperation. Security. Why is the help standing in the middle of the gala? Seo Yun's voice sliced through the classical music like a serrated blade. She stepped directly into Talia's personal space, her eyes flickering with pure venom as they landed on the twins, Zion and Zuri, who held Talia's hands with an eerie, calm dignity. "Talia, honey," Seo Yun sneered, her voice dripping with enough malice to poison the vintage champagne. "Who invited a nanny to a night like this? Your class isn't in this room. People like you come to Korea for labor, for slavery. Go sit in the corner before you stain the upholstery with your presence." Seo Yun leaned in, ready to deliver a final, crushing insult, but the words died in her throat. A sudden, heavy silence fell over the ballroom, the kind of silence that only follows a god of war. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees as the massive oak doors were thrown wide. Park Min-jae, the most feared man in the Korean underground, stepped into the light. The dragon tattoo on his neck pulsed as he ignored the elite crowd, his eyes locked solely on the woman Seo Yun had just called a slave. Every socialite in the room froze. The security guards, who had been moving to intervene, stood like statues. Seo Yun's face turned a ghastly shade of gray as Min-jae stopped inches behind Talia, his hand coming to rest protectively on her waist. "My queen!" Min-jae's voice vibrated through the silent hall, low and deadly. "Is this woman bothering you? Or should I have the staff remind her whose house she is currently trespassing in? Before I tell you how this night became the graveyard of a dynasty, I have to ask you for a favor. Write in the comments where you're watching me from. I would love to see how far this voice travels, and please don't forget to like and subscribe. Your help is very important. What I'm about to share with you is something I never thought could happen to me at home. This is a story about trust, betrayal, and the kind of evil that hides behind a smile. The air in the grand Shilla Ballroom was thick with the scent of lilies and the cold, metallic tang of old money. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen constellations above the heads of Seoul's most ruthless elite, casting a jagged, unforgiving light on the scene below. I smoothed the silk of my emerald gown, the fabric cool against my skin, and tightened my grip on Zion and Zuri's hands. My twins, barely 4 years old, stood with a preternatural stillness that they hadn't learned from me. They had inherited it from the shadow that currently loomed in the VIP wing of the building. Before I tell you how this night became the graveyard of a dynasty, I have to ask you for a favor. Write in the comments where you're watching me from. I would love to see how far this voice travels. Your support is the only reason I'm standing here to tell the truth. Please, don't forget to like and subscribe. It's the only way we ensure the world hears what happened behind these gold leaf doors. What I'm about to share is something I never thought could happen to me in a place I called home. This is a story about trust, betrayal, and the kind of evil that hides behind a designer smile. That smile belonged to Seo Yun. She approached us not with a walk, but with a predatory glide, her silver heels clicking against the marble like a metronome counting down to a disaster. She was draped in white lace, looking every bit the virtuous heiress of the Hale shipping empire, but I knew the rot that lived beneath the fabric. She stopped 3 paces away, her nose crinkling as if she had caught the scent of something decaying in the midst of the perfume and expensive champagne. I had heard the security at the Shilla had tightened, yet here you are. Seo Yun began, her voice a high, melodic trill that didn't quite hide the jagged edge of her malice. She didn't look at my face. She looked at the twins, her eyes narrowing with a disgust she didn't bother to mask. "Talia, honey, I have to hand it to you. Most women in your position would have stayed in the shadows after the scandal. But you actually showed up. Tell me, did you come here to serve drinks? Or did you manage to convince someone that nannies belong on the guest list?" I didn't move. I didn't blink. I had spent years learning that the best way to handle a snake was to let it strike until it exhausted its venom. The ballroom was full of people who saw me as an outsider, a black woman whose presence here was a riddle they couldn't solve. To Seo Yun, I was merely the help she remembered from a lifetime ago, a footnote in her story of perceived superiority. The guest list is private, Seo-yun, I said, my voice low and steady, vibrating with a calm that seemed to agitate her. If you're confused about why I'm here, perhaps you should spend less time looking at me and more time looking at your father's plummeting stock options. Seo-yun let out a sharp, brittle laugh that drew the attention of a nearby circle of investors. My father is here to finalize a deal with the primary investor of the Vaughn Global Fund. We are talking about billions of dollars, the kind of power that keeps families like yours in service for generations. You are a service provider. You come from a world of labor, of slavery. You should be in the kitchen prepping the wagyu, not staining the upholstery with your presence. Go sit in a corner before someone mistakes you for a waitress and asks for a refill. She stepped closer, the smell of expensive gin and bitter resentment rolling off her in waves. Don't think that just because you're wearing a nice dress you've changed your blood. You'll always be the girl who cleans up after people like me. The room grew quiet as the master of ceremonies stepped onto the dais. The microphone hummed, a low-frequency warning that the power in the room was about to shift. Seo-yun smoothed her lace skirts, her face lighting up with a triumphant glow. She believed her salvation was at hand. She believed the mysterious American billionaire her father had been courting was about to walk through those doors and validate her arrogance. Ladies and gentlemen, the host's voice boomed, echoing off the gold-leafed ceilings. Tonight is about the future of Korean industry. After months of negotiation, we are honored to introduce the woman who has acquired the majority stake in our shipping and tech sectors. Please, join me in welcoming our main investor and the new chairwoman of the Shilla Group, Miss Talia Vaughn. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that precedes a landslide. Seo-yun's face didn't just pale. It turned a sickly, translucent gray. Her glass of champagne tilted in her hand, droplets of gold liquid splashing onto her white lace. But she didn't notice. Her eyes were fixed on me as I let go of the twins' hands and stepped forward into the spotlight. The path through the crowd opened like the Red Sea, not out of respect, but out of a sudden, paralyzing fear. I walked toward the stage with a slow, deliberate grace, each step a hammer blow to Seo-yun's reality. I wasn't the nanny. I wasn't the help. I was the hand that held her family's throat. But the explosion wasn't over. As I reached the center of the room, the heavy oak doors of the VIP wing were thrown open by men in identical black suits. They didn't move like security. They moved like a private army. At the center of the formation was a man who moved with the lethal elegance of a panther. Park Min-jae. He didn't wear a tuxedo. He wore a black-on-black suit that seemed to swallow the light around him. The top buttons of his shirt were undone, and as he walked, the black ink of a dragon's tail curled up from beneath his collar, hugging his jawline like a threat. He was the man the police wouldn't touch and the government feared. The king of the Korean underworld. Min-jae didn't look at the host. He didn't look at the cameras. His eyes were locked on me with a terrifying, singular devotion. He walked straight to my side, ignoring the gasps of the elite. He reached out and placed a heavy, protective hand on the small of my back, his touch claiming me in front of the entire world. He turned his gaze toward Seo-yun. It wasn't the look of a man facing an equal. It was the look of a god deciding which part of an insect to crush first. You were speaking about service, Seo-yun, Min-jae said, his voice a low, guttural vibration that seemed to rumble in the very floorboards beneath us. And you spoke about class. But you forgot one thing. In this city, my wife is the law, and I am the executioner. If you ever speak to her again, if you even breathe the same air, I will ensure your family's legacy is erased before the sun rises. He looked down at Zion and Zuri, who were now standing by his legs. Zion looked up at him and spoke in a clear, aristocratic Korean that made the surrounding investors recoil in shock. Father, why is the white lace lady crying? She said we were slaves. Min-jae's jaw tightened, the dragon tattoo on his neck pulsing with the rhythm of his rising fury. He looked back at Seo-yun, who was now trembling so violently her heels were clicking against the marble. Slaves, Min-jae whispered, the word carrying more weight than a death sentence. Talia, my queen, would you like me to show her what real servitude looks like? Or shall we simply strip her father of his port access and let the debt collectors handle the rest? I looked at Seo Yun, my face a mask of cold indifference. I reached out and adjusted the lapel of Min Jae's suit, leaning in so the room could see the intimacy between the billionaire and the boss. I don't invest in companies run by people with budget personalities. Seo Yun, I said, my voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom. And I don't negotiate with ghosts. Guards, escort the Hale family out. Use the service entrance. It's where they belong. The crowd parted in a frantic rush as the security team descended. Seo Yun's father tried to protest, but one look from Min Jae silenced him. They were dragged out of the ballroom in total disgrace, their designer clothes and high society titles stripped away by the sheer gravity of our presence. The night was far from over, but as Min Jae led me toward the VIP lounge with our children by our side, the message was clear. The nanny was gone. The Empress had arrived. And for those who had mistaken my grace for weakness, the price was everything. The aftermath of the Shilla Gala didn't feel like a victory. It felt like the heavy, ionized air right before a lightning strike. In the weeks that followed, the headlines had been a relentless drumbeat of our names: Talia Vaughn, the Emerald Empress of Silicon Valley, and Park Min Jae, the Dragon of Seoul. To the public, we were a dark, romantic myth. But behind the reinforced glass of our penthouse, the reality was a silent, tactical preparation for a war that hadn't yet declared itself. I had spent my life navigating the glass ceilings of corporate America, but in Korea, the ceilings were made of something much harder to break: blood, tradition, and the jagged remains of Min Jae's past. Before I dive into the darkness that followed that night, I have to ask you for a favor. Write in the comments where you're watching me from. I want to see how far this story of survival is traveling. Your help is the only reason I can keep sharing this, so please don't forget to like and subscribe. What I'm about to tell you is the part one wish I could forget. The moment I realized that some people don't just want to win. They want to see the world burn just to stay warm. This is a story about the kind of obsession that turns a human being into a monster. That monster was Seo Yun. While I was busy integrating the Hale shipping assets into my global portfolio, Seo Yun was rotting in the silence of her family's social exile. Humiliation is a slow-acting poison, and for someone like her, who had been raised to believe the world was her birthright, the taste of defeat was acidic. She didn't go into the shadows to hide. She went there to sharpen her teeth. She wasn't just angry. She was obsessed. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw me standing in that emerald dress, flanked by the man she still considered her property. She didn't see a woman who had earned her seat at the table. She saw a nanny who had stolen her life. I didn't come this far to lose him to her, she whispered to the empty, darkened rooms of her father's villa. Her voice had become a raspy, hollow thing, stripped of its melodic lace. She sat surrounded by printed photos of us, snapshots from the gala, grainy long-lens shots of me taking Zion and Zuri to school, images of Min Jae looking at me with a tenderness he had never once shown her. She began to believe her own delusion, that Min Jae was a victim of my foreign charms, and that the twins were nothing more than anchors I had used to trap him. To Seo Yun, eliminating me wasn't just revenge. It was a rescue mission. But she knew she couldn't strike us alone. Min Jae's security was a fortress, a multi-layered shield of technology and human loyalty that she couldn't pierce with a checkbook that was rapidly shrinking. She needed a bigger hammer. She needed the only thing Min Jae truly feared: his own history. In the damp, neon-blurred alleys of Busan, far from the polished marble of Seoul, there were men who spoke Min Jae's name with a mixture of terror and ancient, simmering hatred. These were the rivals he had crushed on his way to the top, the remnants of the Black Tiger Syndicate. They had been waiting for a crack in the dragon's scales for a decade. Seo Yun, driven by a madness that masqueraded as love, decided to provide that crack. She arranged a meeting in a basement bar that smelled of stale smoke and old blood, a place where a woman of her class wouldn't be caught dead. She wore a heavy coat and a silk scarf pulled tight around her face, but she didn't flinch when the scarred, hollow-eyed men of the Tigers surrounded her. She wasn't afraid of them. She was far too busy being afraid of a world where I existed and she didn't. "You want Park Min Jae's head?" she said, her voice steady as she laid a thick digital drive on the scarred wooden table. And I want his heart. We can both have what we want. The men laughed, a sound like dry leaves skittering over pavement. But their laughter died when they saw the data on the drive. Seo Yun hadn't just brought money. She had brought the blueprints to our lives. She had spent weeks using her remaining family connections to map out our security rotations, the specific GPS coordinates of our private retreats, and, most crucially, the exact moments when Zion and Zuri were at their most vulnerable. She offered them access to the unbreakable Shilla hotel network. She offered them the private frequencies of our security details comms. She offered them a betrayal so complete it felt like a physical weight in the room. Her goal was a three-pronged spear. Destroy the Vaughn global reputation, take Min-jae back from the ruins of his life, and eliminate the children. In her twisted mind, the twins were the stain of my bloodline, a reminder of a woman she intended to erase from history. If the children are in the way, she added, her eyes gleaming with a terrifying, flat light, do whatever is necessary. I only care about the man. The rest is collateral. As she spoke those words, the stakes of our story shifted from a corporate rivalry to a life-or-death struggle. Seo Yun had crossed a line that no amount of money or class could ever draw back. She had invited the wolves into the house, convinced that she could control them once they had finished eating. Back in Seoul, I felt the shift. It was a prickle on the back of my neck as I tucked Zuri into bed. The room was silent, the city lights twinkling outside the bulletproof glass like fallen stars, but the air felt heavy. I looked at my daughter's sleeping face, so much like her father's, but with a softness that belonged only to her, and a cold shiver traced my spine. Min-jae entered the room, his footsteps silent as a ghost's. He didn't have to say anything for me to know that something had changed. The dragon tattoo on his neck seemed darker, the tension in his shoulders more pronounced. The tigers are moving, he murmured, his voice so low it was barely a breath. Someone opened the gate for them, Talia. I stood up, smoothing the silk of my loungewear, my mind already racing through 1,000 tactical scenarios. The glow-up was over. The gala was a lifetime ago. We weren't in a ballroom anymore. We were in a trench. Seo Yun thought she was playing a game of hearts, but she had started a war of extinction. She thought she was the one pulling the strings, but she didn't realize that when you make a deal with the devil, you don't get to choose who gets burned. The dark turn had begun. The obsession of a humiliated woman had provided the spark, but the fire that was coming for us was older and much more hungry. I looked at Min-jae, and for the first time I didn't see the businessman or the lover. I saw the mafia boss who had built an empire on the bones of his enemies. Let them come, I said, my voice as cold as the steel he carried beneath his jacket. They think they're hunting a nanny and her kids. They're about to find out that a mother protects her own, and a queen knows how to execute a traitor. The war wasn't just coming to our door, it was already inside. And Seo Yun, in her desperate bid to take back a man who was never hers, had just signed her own death warrant. The high-retention drama of the gala was about to be replaced by the cold, calculated violence of a family pushed to the brink. In the shadows of Seoul, the dragon and the empress were no longer waiting for a reason to strike. We were the strike. The silence of the penthouse was the first thing that betrayed the night. Usually, the high-altitude sanctuary hummed with the distant, rhythmic pulse of Seoul's neon arteries, a comforting reminder that the world was moving beneath us while we remained suspended in glass and steel. But tonight, the air in the living room felt pressurized, as if the oxygen had been sucked out to make room for something heavy and cold. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, my reflection a ghostly emerald blur against the backdrop of the Han River. Zion and Zuri were sprawled on the Persian rug behind me, their laughter echoing off the minimalist walls as they played a game of strategy with ivory chess pieces, a gift from their father that they handled with a reverence far beyond their 4 years. Before I reveal the nightmare that began to unfold at 10:42 p.m., I have a favor to ask. Write in the comments where you're watching me from. I need to know how far this warning travels. Please like and subscribe to help me reach those who might be facing their own hidden enemies. Your support is the only shield I have left to ensure this story isn't buried. What I'm about to share is the moment my home, my sanctuary, became a kill zone. This is a story about the terrifying realization that some people would rather destroy a family than admit they've lost. The first sign of the breach wasn't an alarm. It was a visual glitch. On the bank of security monitors tucked into the mahogany console, the perimeter feed of the private elevator lobby flickered. A black-clothed figure, moving with the jagged efficiency of a professional, stepped into the frame and stayed there for exactly 3 seconds before the screen went to static. My heart didn't race. It went still, a cold, calculated calm settling over me that I had learned from years of surviving corporate boardrooms and, more recently, the shadow of the park syndicate. "Zion Zuri?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper but carrying the absolute authority of a commanding officer. "Pack the pieces. Now, move to the panic room." They didn't ask why. They didn't whine. They saw the shift in my posture, the way my hand drifted toward the underside of the marble coffee table where a compact, sleek obsidian device, Min Jae's emergency insurance, was magnetic latched. They moved with a silent synchronization that broke my heart. 2 small shadows disappearing into the reinforced hallway. I turned back to the window. Far below, at the base of the private drive, 3 matte black SUVs had angled themselves across the entrance, blocking the security detail's path. More black-clothed men were spilling out like ink from a broken pen. These weren't street thugs. These were the black tiger remnants Seo Yun had unleashed, men with nothing to lose and a decade of debt to collect from my husband. The house was surrounded. The unbreakable fortress had been compromised from the inside. The elevator chimed, a sound that should have been mundane but now rang out like a funeral bell. The doors slid open, and the first thing I saw wasn't a gun. It was a pair of silver designer heels, the same ones that had clicked so arrogantly across the Shilla Ballroom weeks ago. Seo Yun stepped into the penthouse, flanked by 2 men whose faces were maps of scars and cold indifference. She wasn't wearing white lace tonight. She was dressed in a sharp, blood-red trench coat. Her hair pulled back so tight it made her eyes look predatory. She looked around the room, her gaze lingering on the discarded chess pieces on the rug, a twisted smile curling her lips. "It's a beautiful cage, Talia," Seo Yun said, her voice dripping with a melodic venom that made the hair on my neck stand up. "But even the most expensive glass shatters when you hit it hard enough." I stood my ground, the obsidian device hidden in the folds of my silk robe. "You've crossed a line you can't come back from, Seo Yun. Min Jae is on his way. My security is cycling back. You have exactly 60 seconds to leave before your life as you know it ends." Seo Yun laughed, a sharp, brittle sound that echoed through the hollow apartment. "Min Jae is currently occupied with a staged riot at the Busan docks. Your security? The ones you trusted? Half of them were paid off by my father's remaining offshore accounts. You see, Talia, you thought you could buy your way into our world. You thought $1 billion and a mafia king could make you one of us." She stepped forward, her eyes gleaming with a terrifying, flat light. She reached out and picked up an ivory queen from the rug, turning it over in her manicured fingers before dropping it. It shattered against the marble. "You stole my life," she hissed, the mask of the elegant heiress finally falling away to reveal the raw, jagged obsession underneath. "You took the man who was promised to me. You put your foreign blood into his legacy. You stood in that ballroom and tried to make me small. But look at you now. A nanny in a big house, waiting for a savior who isn't coming." She signaled to the men behind her. They moved toward the hallway where the twins had disappeared. My blood turned to ice, but my hand remained steady. "Don't," I said, the word a low, guttural warning. Seo Yun ignored me, her face contorting with a sudden, violent rage. "I'm not here for the money, Talia. I'm here for the erasure. I'm going to take everything from you, piece by piece, until there is nothing left but the memory of a woman who tried to be more than she was. You stole my life. Now I'll take yours. And I'll start with the things you love most." The men reached the door to the panic room, their heavy boots thudding against the floor. Seo Yun watched me, waiting for the scream, waiting for me to beg. She wanted the satisfaction of seeing the Emerald Empress reduced to a terrified mother. She wanted to win back the class she had lost by dragging me down into the dirt with her. But she didn't know that I hadn't spent the last few weeks just decorating a penthouse. I had been studying the dragon's way. I had been learning that in a war of extinction you don't wait for the enemy to strike. You set the trap and wait for them to walk into it. You're right about one thing, Seo Yun, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that cut through her laughter. This is a beautiful cage, but you're mistaken about who is on the outside. I pressed the button on the obsidian device. The penthouse didn't explode, but the atmosphere did. A high-frequency pulse tore through the room, a soundless wave that sent Seo Yun's men to their knees, clutching their ears in agony. Simultaneously, the lights cut to a deep, tactical red. The reinforced shutters slammed shut over the windows, sealing us in a tomb of steel and shadow. From the darkness of the hallway, a new sound emerged. It wasn't the sound of men in black suits. It was the low, rhythmic hum of a secondary security system that only 2 people in the world could activate. Seo Yun stumbled, her silver heels failing her as she gripped the back of a sofa. What is this? This is the part where you realize that a queen doesn't just sit on a throne, I said, stepping into the red light, my silhouette long and menacing. She defends it. You came here to take my life? You haven't even survived the first 5 minutes of the war you started. The elevator chimed again, but this time the doors didn't slide open. They were pried apart by hands that had broken bones in every corner of the Seoul underworld. Park Min-jae stepped out, his custom suit drenched in rain, his eyes reflecting the tactical red like the fires of hell itself. He didn't look at me first. He looked at Seo Yun. The silence that followed was the heaviest thing in the room. Seo Yun looked at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and a desperate, pathetic hope. Min-jae, I did this for us. She trapped you. Min-jae didn't let her finish. He didn't even raise his voice. He simply walked toward her, the dragon tattoo on his neck pulsing with the rhythm of a predator who had finally found his prey. You touched my house, he whispered, the words carrying the weight of a death sentence. You threatened my wife. You looked at my children. He stopped inches from her, his presence so suffocatingly cold that Seo Yun actually began to tremble. He reached out, not to strike her, but to gently move a strand of hair from her face, a gesture that was more terrifying than a punch. Talia, Min-jae said, his voice never leaving Seo Yun's face. The twins. Safe, I replied, standing by his side. The panic room held. The tiger remnants in the lobby have been neutralized by the second-tier team. Min-jae nodded slowly. He looked back at Seo Yun, who was now sobbing, her obsession finally meeting the reality of the man she claimed to love. He didn't see a woman he had once known. He saw an infestation that needed to be cleared. You said you'd take her life, Min-jae said to her. But you've already given up yours. From this moment on, Seo Yun, you don't exist. Not to the banks, not to the government, and certainly not to me. My men will take you to a place where the sun doesn't reach. You wanted to see how they help lives? You're about to find out. Seo Yun tried to scream, but the scarred men who had entered with her were already being dragged away by Min-jae's loyalists. As she was ushered toward the elevator, she looked back at me one last time. The hate was still there, but it was hollow, eclipsed by the realization that she had tried to play a game of gods and ended up a sacrificial lamb. The penthouse returned to its pressurized silence, the red light fading back to the soft glow of the city. Min-jae turned to me, the lethal edge in his eyes softening as he pulled me into his arms. I could feel the thrum of his heart against my chest, a violent, protective rhythm. The war isn't over, Talia, he murmured into my hair. The tigers are still out there. Her father will retaliate. I pulled back, looking him in the eye, the emerald of my robe reflecting the strength I had found in the darkness. Let them. They think they're fighting a mafia boss and his wife. They don't realize they're fighting a family. And a family like ours. We don't just survive. We conquer. I walked toward the panic room to get our children, my heels clicking against the marble with a sound that was no longer an echo of Seo Yun's, but a steady, unbreakable rhythm of my own. The attack on the family had failed. But in the shadows of Seoul, the true battle was just beginning. The dark turn had led us here, to the edge of an abyss, and we were the only ones who knew how to fly. The red tactical lights of the penthouse didn't just signal a breach. They signaled the awakening of a fortress that Seo Yun, in her sheltered arrogance, could never have comprehended. The high-frequency hum that had brought her mercenaries to their knees was merely the first layer of a defense system I had spent the last 3 weeks perfecting with Min Jae's lead tech engineers. They had seen me as the American wife, a soft addition to the Dragon's Nest, but they hadn't realized that my background in Silicon Valley wasn't just about venture capital. It was about systems, architecture, and the ruthless optimization of survival. Before I tell you how the nanny became the executioner, I have a favor to ask. Write in the comments where you're watching me from. I want to see how far the reach of a protected family goes. Please like and subscribe to keep this story alive. What I'm about to share is the moment the world learned that Talia Vaughn doesn't need a savior. She needs an objective. This is a story about the real power that shows when a mother is pushed into a corner she owns. I stood in the center of the living room, the obsidian control device warm in my palm, my silhouette cast in long, jagged shadows against the reinforced steel shutters. Seo Yun was gasping, her lungs struggling against the pressurized air of the lockdown, her silver heels skidding on the marble as she tried to regain her footing. Her men were still clutching their heads, their balanced equilibrium shattered by the sonic pulse. They were professional killers, yes, but they were tuned for a world of bullets and blades, not a digital storm designed by a woman who understood the frequency of human fear. I didn't look at Seo Yun. I looked at the monitor embedded in the wall, watching the internal heat signatures of the penthouse. Zion and Zuri were behind the fourth layer of ballistic glass in the panic room, their heart rate steady, their small hands busy with the emergency tablets I'd provided. They weren't crying. They were waiting for the signal. I had raised them to know that in our world, fear is a luxury we don't afford until the threat is neutralized. You thought I was weak because I was kind, Seo Yun? I said, my voice amplified by the room's hidden speakers so it seemed to come from the very walls. You thought because I handle my children with gentleness, I wouldn't know how to handle an infestation in my home. Seo Yun looked up, her face a mask of sweating terror and fading obsession. You're a monster, she wheezed, her voice stripped of its aristocratic polish. Min Jae, he wouldn't want this. He wants a woman of grace, not a butcher. I laughed, and the sound was as cold as the steel shutters sealing us in. Min Jae wants a partner, Seo Yun, and grace is just the glove I wear over a fist of iron. I tapped a command into the obsidian device. From the ceiling, automated sentry turrets, non-lethal but devastatingly precise, deployed with a mechanical hiss. They locked onto the heat signatures of the 2 Tiger remnants who were trying to draw their weapons. Within seconds, high-velocity kinetic rounds, hard rubber infused with lead, struck them in the pressure points of their shoulders and thighs. They didn't have time to scream before they were incapacitated, pinned to the floor by the sheer force of the impact. I walked towards Seo Yun, my emerald silk robe billowing behind me like a battle standard. I wasn't running. I wasn't hiding. I was the apex predator in this ecosystem. I reached out and grabbed her by the throat, my fingers digging into the soft skin she spent thousands to maintain. I leaned in, my breath hot against her ear. You mentioned slavery at the Gala, I whispered. You mentioned class. But look at you now, Seo Yun. On your knees in my house, begging for a breath I control. Who is the servant now? The elevator didn't chime this time. The doors were bypassed by a master override that sent a shower of sparks across the lobby. Park Min Jae stepped out, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop another 10 degrees. He wasn't the man who had kissed me goodbye this morning. He was the dragon of the Park Syndicate, a creature of ancient, calculated violence. He was drenched in the rain of a soul thunderstorm, his black coat gleaming like obsidian scales. In his hand, he carried a suppressed handgun, held with a casual, terrifying familiarity. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The silence he brought with him was more deafening than any shout. He walked past the downed mercenaries without a glance, his boots clicking rhythmically against the marble, a sound that echoed the heartbeat of a predator. He stopped 5 feet from us, his eyes reflecting the tactical red lights like the embers of a dying star. He looked at me first, a silent question in his gaze. I nodded once. Asterisk, the children are safe. The room is mine. Asterisk. Then he looked at Seo Yun. In that moment, I saw the exact second Seo Yun realized she had never known the man she claimed to love. She had fallen in love with a title, with a legacy, with a mask of wealth. She had never understood the world that had forged Park Min-jae. She had never understood that the class she prized was built on a foundation of bone and shadow. To her, the mafia was a romanticized aesthetic. To him, it was a biological necessity. Min-jae stepped closer, the suppressor of his weapon trailing along the edge of the mahogany table. He didn't look angry. He looked bored. And that was the most terrifying thing about him. "You used the Tiger Syndicate to enter my home," Min-jae said, his voice a low, melodic growl. "You used my past to threaten my future." "Min-jae, please," Seo Yun sobbed, her hands clawing at my arm as I held her. "I did it because I love you. She's changing you. She's making you forget who you are." Min-jae stopped inches from her. He reached out with his free hand and gripped her chin, forcing her to look into the void of his eyes. "You think you know who I am? You think a girl who grew up in silk and lace understands the man who walked out of the Busan slums over a mountain of corpses?" He let go of her chin with a flick of his wrist, as if he were discarding trash. He turned to his lead enforcer, who had just stepped out of the shadows behind him. "Wipe the tiger cells in the city. Every safe house. Every contact. If they breathed the same air as this woman tonight, they don't see tomorrow." "Yes, boss," the man replied, disappearing back into the darkness. Min-jae turned back to me, the lethal edge in his posture softening only when his eyes met mine. He reached out and pulled me toward him, his hand firm on the small of my back. It was a claim, a seal, and a promise. "Talia," he murmured, his voice finally regaining a hint of the husband I knew. "You handled them well." "I told you, Min-jae," I said, looking down at Seo Yun, who was now a broken heap on the floor. "I don't just live in your world. I've mastered it." Min-jae looked back at Seo Yun, who was watching us with a hollow, haunted expression. She saw the way he looked at me, with a respect and an equality he had never granted her. She realized that I wasn't his trophy or his nanny. I was his mirror. I was the only person in the world who could stand in the red light with him and not flinch. "Take her," Min-jae commanded, his voice cold and final. "Her father's assets have already been seized. The Hale name is being erased from the shipping registers as we speak. She has no money, no title, and no family left to run to. Put her in the detention block. I want her to watch from the shadows as Talia builds the empire she thought she was entitled to." Seo Yun didn't scream as the guards dragged her toward the service elevator. She was beyond sound. She was a woman who had tried to play a game of gods and realized, too late, that she was merely a pawn. She had looked into the heart of the dragon's world and found that it didn't belong to her. It belonged to the woman she had called a slave. The tactical lights faded, replaced by the warm, golden glow of the penthouse's luxury setting. The shutters retracted, revealing the Seoul skyline, indifferent and shimmering in the rain. The explosion of violence was over, replaced by the quiet, domestic hum of a home restored. I walked to the panic room and entered the code. The glass slid open, and Zion and Zuri ran out, throwing themselves into our arms. Min-jae picked up Zuri, his face finally breaking into a true smile, while Zion stood by my side, looking at the downed men with a curious, analytical gaze. "Mommy," Zion said, his voice clear and steady. "The security system worked, but I think we should recalibrate the third turret's tracking speed." Min-jae laughed, a rich, dark sound that filled the room. He looked at me over our daughter's head, his eyes burning with pride. "You see, Talia? The real power isn't in the blood we spill. It's in the legacy we protect." I looked out at the city, the emerald of my robe catching the light. Seo Yun was gone, her obsession a smudge on the glass of our history. We had shown the world and ourselves that the Park Vaughn alliance was unbreakable. The nanny had protected the nest, the mafia boss had cleared the field, and together, we were the only law that mattered. The real power had shown its face tonight, and it didn't look like an heiress in white lace. It looked like a family standing together in the dark, ready to conquer whatever the morning brought. The war was far from over, but as I stood there with Min-jae and our children, I knew one thing for certain. We weren't just surviving. We were ruling. The rain continued to lash against the reinforced glass of the penthouse, a rhythmic drumming that underscored the deceptive peace of the living room. Seo Yun had been removed, but the air she had poisoned remained, thick with the metallic tang of ozone from the security pulse. Zion and Zuri had finally fallen into a deep, untroubled sleep in the safety of their quarters, blissfully unaware that the woman they knew as a mean lady had just tried to erase their existence. I stood by the kitchen island, my hands wrapped around a porcelain mug of herbal tea that had gone cold, watching Min Jae. He was standing by the window, his back to me, the silhouette of his broad shoulders framed by the flickering neon of the Seoul skyline. He hadn't moved for 10 minutes. Before I reveal the final, jagged piece of Seo Yun's desperate game, I have to ask you for a favor. Write in the comments where you're watching me from. I want to see how far the echoes of this betrayal travel. Please, like and subscribe to help me keep this voice strong. What I'm about to share is the story of a woman who thought she was holding the strings, only to find out she was the one being played. This is a story about the kind of loyalty that can't be bought, and the kind of revenge that leaves no survivors. Seo Yun's removal from the penthouse hadn't been the end. It was the beginning of the fiancé gambit. You see, Seo Yun had one last card to play, a man named Kang Ho. To the public and the tabloids, Kang Ho was the rising star of the Shilla Group's logistics division, a handsome, stoic executive who had recently become Seo Yun's fiancé. To Seo Yun, he was her ultimate weapon. She had spent months grooming him, convincing herself that his position within Min Jae's corporate infrastructure was her secret doorway back into power. She believed she had manipulated him into a state of blind devotion, a puppet who would help her dismantle Min Jae's empire from the inside while she played the grieving, wronged heiress. She didn't know that in the Park Syndicate there are no puppets. There are only wolves and the people they protect. The scene shifted 2 days later to a private, dimly lit lounge in the Gangnam district, a place where the elite went to hide their sins behind velvet curtains and $5,000 bottles of whiskey. Seo Yun sat in a plush leather chair, her blood-red coat replaced by a sharp, ivory suit that screamed, innocence restored. She looked at Kang Ho, who sat across from her, his face a mask of calm, corporate obedience. It's almost over, Kang Ho, Seo Yun whispered, her eyes gleaming with a frantic, feverish light. She reached across the table and touched his hand, her manicured nails digging into his skin. Min Jae is distracted by the incident at the penthouse. He thinks he's won. But you have the codes for the offshore accounts. You have the access to the shipping manifests. Once you leak them to the authorities, his empress will be in a cell, and he will have nowhere to turn but me. Kang Ho didn't flinch. He didn't pull his hand away. He looked at her with an expression that she mistook for adoration, but which was actually the clinical observation of a scientist watching a specimen under a microscope. I have everything you asked for, Seo Yun, he said, his voice as smooth and cold as polished stone. But are you sure you want to go through with this? Once the trigger is pulled, there is no going back for your family. My family is already dead if I don't do this, she hissed, her voice cracking. Talia Vaughn is a virus. She's infected his mind. She's making him weak. I'm doing this for him, Kang Ho. For us, when the dust settles, you'll be the new CEO of the Shilla Group, and I'll be the woman by his side. It's the natural order of things. She believed she was the director of this tragedy. She believed she had seduced Kang Ho into betraying his boss, using her class and her beauty as currency. She didn't realize that Kang Ho had been handpicked by Min Jae 10 years ago, pulled from the same Busan gutters that had forged the dragon himself. Kang Ho wasn't her fiancé. He was her shadow, sent to observe the rot from the inside. Then let's do it, Kang Ho said, standing up. He pulled a slim silver drive from his pocket, the same one Seo Yun had given him to poison Min Jae's systems. The meeting with the investigators is in 1 hour. I'll deliver the killing blow myself. Seo Yun smiled, a true, wide smile that didn't reach her eyes. She stood up and kissed his cheek, a gesture of hollow triumph. I knew I could count on you. You're the only one who truly understands my worth. The meeting took place at the very hotel Seo Yun had tried to claim as her own. She waited in the lobby, hidden behind large sunglasses and a silk scarf, watching the elevator doors. She expected to see Kang Ho walk out with a team of investigators, followed by Min Jae in handcuffs and me in disgrace. She expected to see the world return to the standard she had always known. But when the elevator doors opened, the world didn't break for Min Jae. It broke for her. Kang Ho walked out, but he wasn't alone. He was flanked by Min Jae and me. We walked toward her with a synchronized, lethal grace that made the air in the lobby turn to ice. Seo Yun stood up, her legs trembling, her mouth opening to speak, but no sound came out. She looked at Kang Ho, waiting for the reveal, waiting for him to step forward and denounce us. Kang Ho stopped 2 feet from her. He didn't look like a fiancé. He looked like a soldier standing at attention before his king. "The drive you gave me, Seo Yun," Kang Ho said, his voice echoing through the marble hall. "It was very informative. It contained every illegal transaction your father has made over the last 20 years. It contained the proof of your conspiracy with the Black Tiger Syndicate. And most importantly, it contained the recordings of our private meetings where you detailed your plan to eliminate the park heirs." Seo Yun staggered back, her hand flying to her throat. What are you talking about? Kang Ho, we were getting married. I loved you." Kang Ho looked at her with a pity that was more painful than a punch. "I work for the Park Syndicate, Seo Yun. I've worked for Min Jae since before you knew his name. My engagement to you was a tactical assignment. Min Jae doesn't leave loose ends, and he certainly doesn't leave his enemies to plot in the dark. He wanted to see how deep your obsession went. He wanted to see if you would actually pull the trigger on his children." I stepped forward, the emerald silk of my suit shimmering in the hotel's golden light. I looked at the woman who had called me a slave, who had tried to take my life and my children, and I felt nothing but a cold, clinical satisfaction. "You mentioned trust and betrayal earlier, Seo Yun," I said, my voice carrying the weight of a final judgment. "You thought you were the one doing the betraying, but you didn't understand the kind of loyalty that exists in a family like ours. Kang Ho isn't just an employee. He's a brother. And in our house, we don't betray brothers for people like you." Min Jae stepped into her line of sight, his presence so suffocatingly cold that Seo Yun actually fell to her knees on the hotel's plush carpet. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The dragon didn't need to roar when the prey was already dead. "You spent weeks trying to manipulate my fiancé," Min Jae whispered, leaning down so his face was inches from hers. "But you forgot one thing, Seo Yun. I am the one who writes the scripts in this city. You were never the director. You were always just a prop. And props are meant to be discarded when they stop being useful." He turned to the men waiting in the shadows, actual investigators, but not the ones Seo Yun had hoped for. These were men from the Financial Crimes Division who had been given the silver drive 10 minutes ago. "Take her," Min Jae commanded. "The charges are treason, conspiracy to commit murder, and massive financial fraud. Her family's remaining assets are being liquidated to pay for the damages she caused to the Shilla Group. By the time she sees the sun again, the name Hale will be a footnote in a history book that I wrote." As the officers moved in, Seo Yun looked at Kang Ho one last time. You never loved me?" she wheezed, her world collapsing into a void of her own making. Kang Ho didn't answer. He simply turned his back on her and walked to my side, joining the wall of protection that surrounded our family. He looked at me, a brief, respectful nod, before falling into step behind Min Jae. The betrayal was complete, but it wasn't the one Seo Yun had planned. It was the revenge of a family that had been pushed to the edge and decided to push back. We walked out of the hotel, the morning sun finally breaking through the clouds over Seoul. Min Jae took my hand, his grip firm and unbreakable, while Kang Ho followed, his role as the fiancé ended, his role as the enforcer renewed. Behind us, the screams of Seo Yun were drowned out by the sound of the city moving on. A city that had just seen its last elite fall, replaced by a queen who knew the value of loyalty and a king who knew how to enforce it. The nanny had become the chairwoman. The mafia boss had secured his legacy. And the woman who had tried to burn it all down was now nothing more than a spark that had been extinguished by a flood she never saw coming. The war was over. And as I looked at the man by my side, I knew that in the world of the Park Vaughn Alliance, the only thing more dangerous than our enemies was our love. The neon hum of Seoul's fashion district felt different tonight. It didn't feel like a sanctuary of style, but like a sprawling, glass and steel chessboard where the final pieces were being moved into place. Following the collapse of her fiancé Gambit, Seo-yeon had retreated into the only world she felt she still controlled, the superficial hierarchy of the elite social circles. She was desperate, a wounded animal backed into a corner, and desperate people always return to the weapons they know best. For Seo-yeon, that weapon was the curated cruelty of high-fashion optics. Before I reveal how the nanny took the very clothes off Seo-yeon's back, I have a favor to ask. Write in the comments where you're watching me from. I love seeing how far this story of reclamation travels across the globe. Please, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your engagement is the only reason the truth stays louder than the lies. What I'm about to share is a story about the kind of vanity that blinds you to the ground falling away beneath your feet. This is a story about why you should never mock a woman's threads when she's the one who spun the silk. The setting was the annual night of Muse Gala, a televised red carpet event that dictated the social standing of every heiress in Korea for the following year. I arrived with Min Jae, the twins having been tucked away at a private estate under a guard detail that could hold off a small army. I was draped in a gown of midnight blue velvet, architectural and understated, a piece that whispered power rather than screaming for attention. Seo-yeon was already there, positioned at the center of a swarm of fashion bloggers and paparazzi. She looked radiant in a gown that was a masterpiece of avant-garde gold embroidery, a Von Lenoir original, the most exclusive label in the world, with a waiting list that spanned 3 years. It was the dress of a woman who wanted to signal that despite her family's scandals, she was still untouchable. As soon as she saw me, the predatory gleam returned to her eyes. She moved toward me, the cameras swiveling in our direction like heat-seeking missiles. She wanted a public execution. She wanted to prove that even if I had the man, I would never have the essence of the world she was born into. Talia, dear, Seo-yeon said. Her voice projected perfectly for the microphones surrounding us. She looked me up and down with a pitying smirk, her eyes lingering on the lack of heavy branding on my velvet gown. It's a lovely dress, truly. So sensible. I suppose after coming from a background of service, you find comfort in things that look like a uniform. But tonight is about high art, not high utility. She turned slightly, letting the gold embroidery of her own gown catch the flashes of the cameras. This is a Von Lenoir. There are only 2 in existence. It costs more than a penthouse in Gangnam. I suppose your billionaire husband couldn't get you on the list? Takes more than just mafia money to wear a Von, Talia. Takes lineage. Takes taste. Things you simply can't buy with a quick glow-up. The whispers started immediately. The fashion critics began typing into their phones, the narrative already forming. The American mogul outclassed by the fallen heiress. Seo-yeon was basking in it, her chest heaving with the first hit of social dopamine she'd had in weeks. But she wasn't done. She had coordinated this. Suddenly, 3 investigative fashion journalists stepped forward, their cameras flashing aggressively in my face. Miss Vaughn, one shouted. There are rumors circulating that your venture capital firm is actually a front for counterfeit luxury goods. Is it true that the dress you're wearing tonight is a knockoff of a French archive piece? Is the Vaughn Park empire built on stolen intellectual property? This was her play, a media scandal. If she could tie my brand to counterfeit or stolen status, she would ruin my corporate credibility in the West and my social standing in the East. She wanted to paint me as a fraud who had stolen her way into the elite. I didn't flinch. I didn't look at the cameras. I looked at the gold embroidery on Seo-yeon's chest, the craftsmanship I had personally overseen in a studio in Paris 6 months ago. It's interesting you mention Von Lenoir, Seo-yeon, I said, my voice calm and carrying a resonance that silenced the shouting reporters. And it's even more interesting that you're wearing that specific gown. Tell me, did you read the contract when your father's estate purchased that piece on credit last year? Seo Yun's smirk faltered. What are you talking about? This is an original. My family has been a patron of Lenore for decades. I pulled a small, sleek tablet from my clutch and tapped the screen, casting the image onto the massive LED monitors that lined the Gala's ballroom for the live feed. It wasn't a fashion spread. It was a corporate acquisition filing from 3 years ago, stamped with the seal of the French Ministry of Economy. Von Lenoir isn't just a label I like to wear. Seo Yun, I said, as the crowd gasped at the document on the screens. I am the Von in Von Lenoir. I bought the fashion house when it was nearing bankruptcy in 2023. I own the archives. I own the patents. And I own the very embroidery you're wearing right now. The silence that followed was so heavy it felt physical. The reporters froze, their counterfeit narrative dying in their throats. Seo Yun looked at the screen, then down at her dress, as if the gold threads were suddenly turning into barbed wire. And as for your dress, I continued, stepping closer until our silhouettes blurred into one for the cameras. The contract for that specific piece states that the garment remains the property of the house until the final installment is paid. Your father's accounts were frozen 2 weeks ago for fraud, which means that technically, you are wearing stolen property. Min Jae stepped into the light then, his presence like a cold wind that swept through the ballroom. He didn't say a word. He simply stood behind me, his hand resting on my shoulder, his dark eyes fixed on the investigative journalists. They immediately lowered their cameras, the fear of the dragon overcoming their thirst for a headline. I looked at the lead reporter. You want to talk about narratives? Let's talk about the real one. A disgraced heiress using stolen luxury goods to harass the woman who actually signs her family's debt notices. That sounds like a headline that will get a lot of clicks. Don't you think? I turned back to Seo Yun. She was hyperventilating, the weight of the realization crushing her. She had tried to humiliate me with my own creation. She had tried to mock my class using a brand that bore my name. The dress is beautiful, Seo Yun? I whispered, loud enough for the nearby microphones to catch every word. But you're right, it doesn't suit you. It takes a certain kind of integrity to wear my label. And since you've breached the contract, I'm revoking your right to wear it. Now, I snapped my fingers. 2 female security officers from my personal detail stepped forward. They didn't move like guards. They moved like high-end retail assistants with the authority of the law. Miss Hale, one said firmly, we have a mobile dressing suite waiting outside. You are required to surrender the garment immediately. We have a standard-issue robe for you to wear for your departure. The cameras went wild. The night of Muse was no longer about fashion. It was about the absolute social annihilation of Seo Yun. She was led away in front of the entire world, her gold-embroidered dreams stripped from her body, replaced by the crushing weight of public disgrace. The media scandal she had tried to ignite had backfired so spectacularly that it had consumed her entire identity. I turned back to the crowd, the midnight blue velvet of my gown. A piece that didn't need a label because the woman wearing it was the label, shimmering under the lights. Fashion is about identity, I told the silent room. And tonight, the identity of the Shilla Group has been clarified. We don't tolerate fraud. We don't tolerate bullies. And we certainly don't tolerate people who think a dress can hide a lack of soul. Min Jae took my hand, his grip a silent roar of pride. Together, we walked down the red carpet, the flashbulbs now following us with a new kind of reverence. The nanny had not only protected her family, she had reclaimed the very concept of class from the woman who had used it as a cage. As we reached our car, I looked back at the gala. Seo Yun was gone, her name already being scrubbed from the digital fashion archives. She had tried to ruin me with a dress, only to find out that I was the one who decided who got to wear the crown. The war of the gala was over, and as the city lights blurred past us, I knew that the next time someone questioned my class, they would remember the night a black billionaire took her brand back from the girl who thought she could steal the light. The blue light of the smartphone screen was the only thing illuminating the darkened corner of the penthouse's library, casting a cold, artificial pall over my skin. In the age of digital warfare, a ballroom wasn't the only place to stage an execution. The battlefield had shifted to the palm of every hand and soul. Seo Yun, stripped of her gowns, her family's shipping lines, and her dignity, had retreated into the only fortress she had left, the chaotic, unverified court of public opinion. She was no longer a socialite. She was a digital ghost, haunting the feeds of millions with a desperate, scorched earth campaign designed to turn the world against the foreign intruder and her mafia king. Before I show you how the Empress of the Park Syndicate dismantled a viral lie in real time, I have to ask you for a favor. Write in the comments where you're watching me from. I need to know how far this signal of truth is reaching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. It's the only way we ensure the algorithm doesn't bury the reality of what happened next. What I'm about to share is a story about the kind of evil that hides behind a live filter. This is a story about why you should never start a social media war with a woman who owns the servers. It started at midnight. Seo Yun went live on the nation's largest streaming platform, her face pale and tear-streaked, illuminated by a ring light that made her look like a tragic martyr. She wasn't the arrogant heiress tonight. She was the victim. "I can't stay silent anymore," she sobbed to the 300,000 viewers who had tuned in within minutes. "Talia Vaughn didn't just take my family's business. She took my life. She used her billionaire status as a front to bribe our officials. And when I tried to speak up, she used Park Min-jae's thugs to threaten me. Look at my home, it's gone. My father is in a hospital bed because of the stress. She's a predator, a counterfeit mogul who is using Korea as her personal playground for modern-day colonization." The comments section exploded. Hashtag cancel Talia and hashtag save Seo Yun began to trend globally. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. She began showing evidence, photoshopped bank statements that made it look like I was laundering money through the Shilla Group, and grainy, edited footage of Min-jae's men harassing her in a parking lot. She was spreading fake rumors like a wildfire, banking on the fact that the internet loves a fallen hero and hates a powerful outsider. "She's not who you think she is," Seo Yun whispered, leaning into the camera, her eyes wide with a frantic, manufactured sincerity. "She's a fraud. Her Vaughn Global is a shell company. She's here to drain our economy and leave us in ruins. If we don't stop her now, who will be next?" I stood in the center of the penthouse living room, watching the stream on the massive 90-inch display. Min-jae stood beside me, his arms crossed over his chest, his face a mask of stone. His men were already reaching for their phones, their fingers itching to trace the signal and end the broadcast with a physical intervention. "Should I have the signal jammed?" Min-jae asked, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "My tech team can have her offline in 60 seconds. "No," I said, my thumb hovering over the screen of my own device. "If we shut her down now, we make her a martyr. People will think we're hiding something. In a social media war, silence is a confession, and censorship is a confirmation. No, Min-jae, we're going to let her speak. We're going to let her dig a hole so deep she'll never see the sun again." I tapped a command on my tablet. As the CEO of a tech-heavy venture capital firm, I hadn't just invested in fashion. I had spent the last year acquiring minority stakes in the very data centers that hosted these platforms. I didn't need to jam her signal. I needed to hijack it. I signaled my PR and legal teams. Activate the Truth Sync protocol. Connect the Shilla Group's verified archives to the live feeds API. We're going to do a live fact check that the world will never forget. Suddenly, on the side of Seo Yun's live stream, a verified window appeared, a community note, on steroids. As Seo Yun spoke about her father's stress-induced illness, the window displayed his actual medical records from the previous hour, showing him in a luxury spa in Jeju, perfectly healthy and sipping cognac. When she showed the laundered bank statements, the window pulled up the original, unedited blockchain ledgers, showing that the money had actually been moved by her father into an illegal offshore account to avoid taxes. Seo Yun didn't notice at first. She was too busy performing. "Talia Vaughn is a liar," she screamed, her voice hitting a fever pitch. "She's a fake." The comments shifted instantly. "Wait, look at the sidebar. Is that the real ledger? She's lying about her dad. Look at the timestamp on those photos." The tide was turning, but I wasn't finished. I wanted the total public cancellation of the woman who had dared to threaten my family's integrity. I hit the join stream button. Because of my administrative bypass, I didn't need her permission to enter the live room. My face appeared on the split screen next to hers. I wasn't wearing a ring light. I was standing in my darkened library, the moonlight catching the emerald of my robe, looking every bit the sovereign she claimed I was. "Hello, Seo-yun?" I said, my voice calm, melodic, and terrifyingly clear. Seo-yun froze. Her eyes darted to the side, seeing me for the first time. The terror in her gaze was real this time. How are you doing this? This is my stream. Security. Block her. You're using my servers, Seo-yun, I said, leaning in. You're using a platform I helped build. You wanted to tell the truth to the world? Let's tell it together. Let's talk about the $3 million you tried to wire to the Black Tiger Syndicate last week. Or should we talk about the fake rumors you just spent the last hour spinning? I swiped my screen, and the live feed was replaced by a video I had been holding in reserve. It was a recording from the Shilla penthouse's internal security. The night Seo-yun had broken in. It showed her standing over my children's chess set, whispering her plan to eliminate the brats. It showed her admitting that she didn't care about Min-jae. She only cared about the throne. The world watched in a collective, horrified gasp. The victim was revealed as a conspirator. The heiress was revealed as a potential child killer. You stole my life, Seo-yun screamed, her composure finally shattering into 1,000 jagged pieces. She lunged at her camera, her face distorted by a primal, ugly rage. You're a black bitch who doesn't belong in our world. The screen went black. I hadn't cut the feed. The platform's automated hate speech filters had caught the slur and terminated her account instantly. The silence in the penthouse was absolute. I looked at Min-jae, who was watching me with a look of pure, unadulterated awe. He had spent his life fighting with lead and iron, but he had just watched me win a war with data and light. It's over, I said, dropping the tablet onto the sofa. The public won't just cancel her. They'll erase her. Every brand she ever touched. Every socialite who ever invited her to lunch. They're all deleting her as we speak. By the next morning, the hashtag Talia was right was trending at #1. Seo-yun was no longer a martyr. She was a pariah. She had tried to use the internet to humiliate me, only to find out that, in the digital age, the truth travels faster than a lie when a queen is the one pushing the button. The social media war ended not with a bang, but with a user not found message. Seo-yun had been cancelled publicly, her reputation incinerated in the very fire she had started. And as I stood on the balcony with Min-jae, watching the sun rise over a city that finally knew my name for all the right reasons, I knew that the nanny had just finished her final lesson. In our world, you don't just win the fight, you control the narrative. And the narrative belonged to the Empress. The scent of vintage oak and fermented grapes hung heavy in the air of the Shilla's private cellar, a subterranean cathedral of stone and glass where the most expensive liquid in Korea was stored. Tonight wasn't a public gala. It was an intimate vintner's circle gathering, a meeting of the 10 families who controlled the hospitality industry. I stood near a rack of 1945 Rothschild, the emerald silk of my wrap dress catching the dim, amber light. Zion and Zuri were safely at home, but the tension in my shoulders told me the night was far from peaceful. Min-jae stood a few paces away, his hands clasped behind his back, looking less like a businessman and more like a king inspecting his armory. Before I reveal how the nanny turned a glass of red wine into a bloodbath of corporate interests, I have to ask you for a favor. Write in the comments where you're watching me from. I want to see how far the vintage of this revenge is being poured. Please, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support is the only thing that keeps the truth from being corked. What I'm about to share is a story about a woman who thought she could sour the well, only to find out she was the one drinking the dregs. This is a story about why you should never try to poison a deal when the owner of the vineyard is standing right in front of you. Seo-yun was there, of course. She had managed to scrape together enough social capital from her few remaining desperate allies to secure an invitation. She looked haggard, her eyes sunken despite the heavy layers of designer concealer, but the malice in her gaze was sharper than ever. She was holding a glass of deep, blood-red Cabernet, her fingers trembling so slightly that the wine rippled like a miniature stormy sea. She began to move toward me, her path calculated to intercept me near a white marble tasting table. I saw the intent in her eyes before she even took the step, the classic, desperate move of a fallen socialite. She wanted to accidentally trip. She wanted to ruin my dress, to humiliate me in front of the vintners, to make me look like a clumsy outsider who couldn't navigate a simple tasting room. She lunged, her foot catching on the rug, the glass of red wine tilting dangerously toward my chest. I didn't flinch. I didn't even move, because Min Jae was already there. With a speed that defied his heavy frame, his hand shot out, catching Seo Yun's wrist in midair. The wine sloshed, but not a single drop touched my dress. Instead, the force of his grip caused the liquid to splash back, soaking Seo Yun's ivory sleeve. She gasped, the cold glass clinking against his ringed fingers. "You're clumsy tonight, Seo Yun," Min Jae said, his voice a low, terrifying vibration that made the nearby sommelier go pale. "Perhaps the weight of your lies is making it hard to stand." He didn't let go of her wrist. He twisted it just enough to make her drop the glass, which he caught in his other hand before it could shatter on the stone floor. He set it down on the table with a sharp clack. "Min Jae, let go. You're hurting me," she hissed, though the fear in her eyes said she was more hurt by his public rejection. "I'm not the one hurting you," Min Jae whispered, leaning in so only she and I could hear. "You're doing that all by yourself. Did you think I wouldn't notice the phone calls? Did you think I didn't see you poisoning the well with the European distributors?" This was the twist. Seo Yun hadn't just come here to spill wine. While she had been losing the public war, she had been working like a parasite in the shadows, contacting the Shilla Group's international wine and spirits suppliers. She had been whispering that the Park-Vaughan alliance was unstable, that my American tech money was a bubble about to burst, and that Min Jae's mafia ties would lead to a total European boycott. She had almost succeeded in stalling a $300 million distribution deal that was the backbone of our Q4 projections. Seo Yun pulled her arm back, a manic, triumphant grin breaking through her terror. "It's too late, Min Jae. I've talked to the Bordeaux houses. I've talked to the Italian estates. They won't sign. They don't trust a nanny to run a luxury legacy, and they don't trust a criminal to protect their labels. You're isolated. Your network is rotting from the inside, and I'm the one who poured the salt." The room went silent. The other vintners watched, their faces unreadable. For a moment it looked like Seo Yun had actually landed a blow. She had targeted the one thing a mafia boss prizes most: his infrastructure. I stepped forward then, moving into the amber light, my face a mask of calm, clinical satisfaction. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a single handwritten letter on heavy, cream-colored parchment. It bore the wax seal of the Grand Cru Union of France. "You're right about one thing, Seo Yun," I said, my voice carrying the weight of a gavel. "Infrastructure is everything. But you made a classic mistake. You assumed these families listen to rumors. In this world, they only listen to the person who owns the land." I handed the letter to the chairman of the Vintners Circle. As he read it, his eyes widened. "Seo Yun," I continued, walking a slow circle around her. "You spent 3 weeks trying to poison my business deals. But while you were talking to regional managers, I was in Burgundy. I didn't just talk to the estates. I bought the controlling interest in the shipping fleet that brings their wine to Asia. I bought the glass factory that makes their bottles. And as of 4 o'clock this afternoon, I am the landlord of the very cellar we are standing in." Min Jae stepped to my side, his hand finding the small of my back. "The network isn't rotting, Seo Yun," he said, his eyes fixed on her with a predatory finality. "It's being pruned. I've spent the last hour on the phone with your father's remaining silent partners. I offered them a choice. Continue to listen to a delusional ghost or keep their heads. They chose the latter." What did you do?" Seo Yun stammered, her face turning a ghastly shade of gray. "I destroyed your network," Min Jae said simply. "Every person you spoke to, every contact you used to spread your poison, they've been blacklisted. Not just from the Shilla Group, but from every port, every warehouse, and every distribution line in Korea. You haven't just lost your seat at the table, Seo Yun. You've lost the right to even enter the room." The chairman of the circle looked up from the letter, his expression one of deep respect. Miss Vaughn, it seems the union has appointed you as their sole representative in East Asia. My apologies for the distraction. He signaled to the security team at the door. Please, remove this woman. She is no longer a member of the circle. Seo Yun didn't even fight as the guards grabbed her arms. She looked like a puppet whose strings had been cut. She had tried to ruin us with the very things she thought made her elite. Taste, connections, and legacy. Only to find out that we had replaced the entire system while she was busy playing with a glass of wine. As she was dragged up the stone stairs and out into the night, I picked up the glass Min Jae had caught. I swirled the dark liquid, the aroma of plum and spice filling the air. It's a shame, I said, looking at the wine. It was a good vintage. But some things are just too bitter to keep around. I poured the wine onto the stone floor, watching it disappear into the cracks. Min Jae took the empty glass from my hand and set it aside, his eyes burning with a pride that was more intoxicating than any drink in the room. The nanny had secured the empire's thirst. The Mafia Boss had silenced the whispers, and together, we had shown the elite that our roots went deeper than their history. The wine scene was over. The poison had been drained. And as we turned back to the vintners to finalize the deal of a century, I knew that the taste of victory was the only thing that would linger on our palates tonight. The network was ours. The city was ours. And Seo Yun? She was just a stain on the floor that the janitors would clean up by morning. The air in Seoul had turned brittle, a jagged winter wind whipping through the glass canyons of Gangnam, as if the city itself were bracing for an impact. In the weeks following the humiliation at the wine cellar, the name Seo Yun had become a whisper, a cautionary tale of a woman who had tried to touch the sun and found herself encased in ice. But silence in our world is rarely peace. It is usually the sound of a fuse burning in the dark. While I was focused on stabilizing the Shilla Group's international shipping lanes, Seo Yun had retreated into a subterranean madness. She was no longer a socialite. She was a ghost fueled by a singular, radioactive obsession. To her, I wasn't just a rival. I was the thief of her destiny, the foreign nanny who had stolen the king and the crown. Before I reveal the final, bloody conclusion to this war, I have to ask you for a favor. Write in the comments where you're watching me from. I want to see how far the legacy of this victory travels. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support is the only reason I can tell you what happened when the masks finally came off. What I'm about to share is the story of a woman who burned down her entire world just to see a flicker of pain in mine. This is a story about the ultimate power of a family that refuses to break. Seo Yun's obsession had reached a fever pitch that transcended logic. She had spent her remaining offshore black market funds on a singular, desperate alliance. She didn't go to the elite. She went to the abyss. In the rotting industrial districts of Incheon, she met with the Viper Syndicate, the only mafia rival brutal enough to challenge Min Jae's hegemony. They didn't care about class or lineage. They only cared about the bounty Seo Yun placed on my head, and the heads of my children. I don't want her dead immediately, Seo Yun had told the Vipers, her voice a raspy, hollow shell of its former self. Her eyes were sunken, her skin sallow, her designer clothes stained and wrinkled. I want her to watch as you take the twins. I want her to see the Park legacy burn. And then, I want Min Jae to find me in the ashes. She truly believed that once I was gone, the natural order would restore itself. She believed Min Jae would return to her out of some twisted sense of shared history. It was a delusion so deep it had become her entire reality. The final war began on a Tuesday, at the very place where our public battle had started, the Grand Shilla Ballroom. We were hosting a charity auction for the Vaughn Park Foundation, a high-security event meant to signal our total control over the city. I was dressed in a gown of liquid gold, Zion and Zuri by my side in their matching bespoke velvet. Min Jae was a silent, lethal shadow at my shoulder, his presence a deterrent that should have kept any sane enemy at bay. But the Vipers weren't sane, and Seo Yun was beyond reason. At exactly 9:15 p.m., the power to the Shilla grid didn't just flicker, it was physically severed. The backup generators kicked in, bathing the ballroom in a haunting tactical red light. From the skylights above, black-clad figures descended on high-speed rappels, their suppressed weapons spitting lead into the security detail. The screams of the elite rose in a wave of terror, but I didn't scream. I felt Min Jae's hand on my arm, his grip a silent command. The panic room, he hissed, his voice a low melodic growl. Talia, go. Now. I didn't argue. I scooped up Zuri while Zion gripped my hand with a strength that spoke of his father's blood. We moved toward the VIP exit, but the doors were kicked open before we could reach them. Seo Yun stood there, flanked by 3 massive, scarred men from the Viper Syndicate. She was holding a handgun with a trembling hand, her face a mask of primal, ugly triumph. You're not going anywhere, Talia, she screamed over the chaos. The nanny is done playing queen. Your children don't belong in this world, and neither do you. She signaled her men to lunge for the twins. This was the moment she had waited for, the moment she would break me. But Seo Yun had forgotten one fundamental truth about the woman I had become. I hadn't just married the dragon. I had learned how to breathe fire. I reached into the hidden holster beneath the gold silk of my gown and pulled out the compact obsidian device I had carried since the first attack. I didn't aim it at her. I aimed it at the floor. You think I'm trapped in here with you, Seo Yun? I said, my voice cutting through the red light like a blade. I own the ground you're standing on. I pressed the override. The floor beneath Seo Yun's men didn't break. It pressurized. High-intensity magnetic clamps, built into the Shilla's structural foundation for extreme security, activated instantly. The metal plates in the mercenaries' boots and the weapons in their hands were suddenly slammed to the floor by 10 tons of magnetic force. They were pinned, their bodies jerking as they tried to fight the invisible weight. Seo Yun stumbled back, her plastic-framed handgun clattering to the floor as the magnets yanked it from her grip. She looked up, her eyes wide with a realization that came too late. Min Jae stepped past me then. He didn't look like a man defending a ballroom. He looked like the angel of death. Behind him, the Shilla's elite security, men who had been trained for this specific final war, emerged from the shadows like ghosts. The Viper Syndicate wasn't an army. They were an infestation, and Min Jae was the cure. In a flurry of suppressed fire and hand-to-hand brutality that lasted less than 60 seconds, the Vipers were eliminated. The red light shifted back to gold. The silence that followed was heavy with the scent of cordite and the weight of a total, final victory. Min Jae walked towards Seo Yun. He didn't stop until he was inches from her. He reached down and picked up her discarded gun, turning it over in his hand with a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. You tried to touch my children, Seo Yun, he whispered, the words carrying a resonance that made the remaining guests tremble. You brought a war to my house. You thought your obsession made you powerful, but it only made you a target. Seo Yun fell to her knees, her tears carving tracks through the grime on her face. Min Jae, I loved you. We were supposed to be the legacy. Min Jae didn't even look at her as he spoke his final command. Legacy is earned, not stolen. You are a ghost, Seo Yun, and ghosts don't belong in my city. He signaled his lead enforcer. Take her to the Busan docks. No trials. No headlines. She is to be erased. Not even a memory of her name will remain in this country by sunrise. Seo Yun screamed as she was dragged away, a hollow, echoing sound that faded into the distance. She was completely destroyed, financially, socially, and physically. Her obsession had led her to the abyss, and the abyss had finally swallowed her whole. Min Jae turned back to me, his eyes softening as he reached out to touch Zion's hair. I stood tall in my gold gown, the Emerald Empress who had survived the fire and come out stronger. I looked at the ballroom, at the elite who were now bowing their heads in a new kind of terror and respect. They didn't see an outsider anymore. They didn't see a nanny. They saw the matriarch of the most powerful syndicate in Asia. Is it over? I asked, my voice steady. Min Jae pulled me into his arms, his heart beating a strong, steady rhythm against my own. It's over, Talia. The city is ours. The future is ours. I looked down at our children, the heirs to a kingdom that was no longer built on shadow, but on an unbreakable alliance of tech and iron. The final war had been won. The nanny had become the sovereign. And as the morning sun began to break over the Seoul skyline, illuminating the gold of my dress and the strength of my family, I knew that our power was absolute. The world finally understood. You can challenge a king, but you never, ever cross the queen who protects his crown. Before we move into the final reckoning, I want to take a moment to thank every single one of you for standing by me through this storm. Your support is the shield that keeps this story alive. If you haven't already, drop a comment with your country's flag. I want to see exactly how far this voice travels across the globe. And if you're riding with the Park Syndicate, make sure to like and subscribe. We're just getting started.